And staying with the Sahel, the power landscape is shifting under Ibrahim Traoré and Vladimir Putin. As Western influence recedes across parts of the region, Russia is expanding its footprint. And now Burkina Faso and Moscow have formalized their partnership. In Moscow, the two countries signed what they call an agreement on the foundations of relations. The framework replaces the previous cooperation structure between the two states. Both sides describe it as the beginning of a new strategic phase.
A quiet meeting, two foreign ministers, a document with a name so technical it almost hides itself. Agreement on the foundations of relations. No fireworks, no dramatic speech. And yet, something about it feels heavier than it looks. Why would Burkina Faso choose this moment to deepen ties with Russia? What pressure is shaping this decision? Security, sanctions, shifting alliances, or something psychological? Is this about weapons and training, or about gold and leverage? Is Moscow expanding its influence, or is Ouagadougou expanding options? And why does the reaction from Western capitals sound cautious instead of furious? Is Burkina Faso rewriting its position in the global order, or merely changing the players? Let's find out. Timing in geopolitics is never accidental. Leaders do not deepen strategic relationships in the middle of uncertainty unless the uncertainty itself creates opportunity. So, the first question is not about Russia. It is about momentum. Why February? Why now? Burkina Faso is operating in a transformed security and diplomatic environment. In recent years, French forces withdrew from the country, marking the end of a long chapter in Sahel security cooperation. That withdrawal did more than remove troops. It removed a psychological anchor that had defined external security support for decades. When that anchor disappears, a state must either drift or redesign. At the same time, regional tensions within ECOWAS intensified after political transitions in the Sahel. Burkina Faso, alongside Mali and Niger, signaled dissatisfaction with the old regional frameworks and began rethinking its alliances. That shift was not emotional, it was structural. If the regional balance changes, the external partnerships must adjust too. Now widen the lens. Russia is under extensive Western sanctions due to the Ukraine conflict. Sanctions restrict financial flows, technology transfers, and diplomatic engagement with much of Europe and North America. In response, Moscow has pursued deeper engagement with non-Western partners, particularly in Africa. This is not ideological romance. It is a strategic adaptation. So you have two movements happening simultaneously. Burkina Faso is seeking diversified partnerships after the collapse of its previous security architecture. Russia is seeking expanded diplomatic corridors amid global polarization. When two strategic needs intersect, meetings follow.
We also prioritize humanitarian support for Burkina Faso. Last year, we allocated 25,000 tons of wheat free of charge, and this month we are going to send a large supply of other food products to Ouagadougou. We appreciate the support from Burkina Faso on many international platforms, including the UN and other multilateral platforms. A useful format of cooperation is the consultations between Russia and Sahel States Confederation. April this year, such a session was held in Moscow with foreign ministers. There are good prospects in many areas, and we will have a chance to discuss some of them today. Thank you for your attention.
But there's a deeper layer most commentary ignores. The global system itself is fragmenting. The post-Cold War order, where one bloc-dominated decision-making is no longer stable. China has risen. Russia has recalibrated. Middle powers assert autonomy. Energy markets have shifted. Supply chains are being reorganized. Strategic minerals are now central to industrial policy worldwide. In moments like this, smaller states face a choice: remain inside old alignments out of habit, or reposition early while the structure is still fluid. Burkina Faso chose repositioning. And repositioning is easier when the world is distracted. Major powers preoccupied with Europe and Asia often underestimate shifts in Africa. That creates space. Quiet space. space for agreements that look administrative but carry strategic weight. The February meeting was not dramatic because it did not need to be. It was deliberate. It was procedural. And that's what makes it powerful. Foundational agreements are not temporary gestures. They establish frameworks for long-term cooperation in diplomacy, trade, education, and security. But here is the real tension underneath the timing. Was this move defensive, filling a security vacuum left by France? Or was it offensive, expanding Burkina Faso's negotiating leverage in a multipolar world? Because the answer to that question determines whether this moment is reactive or transformational. If you ask officials, they will tell you this is about cooperation, stability, and mutual respect. But stability is always a surface word. Beneath it lies power. Burkina Faso is fighting insurgent groups that operate fluidly across borders, groups that exploit weak infrastructure, vast territory, and limited state capacity. For years, Western-backed missions promised containment, training, and modernization. Yet insecurity persisted. French troops deployed. French troops withdrew. The result? A population that began questioning whether inherited security formulas were truly designed for long-term sovereignty or for managing instability at a tolerable level. Security fatigue produces political clarity. When the old model fails to deliver decisive control, leaders must search for alternatives. That is where Russia enters, not as savior, not as ideology, but as an option. Russia offers military training, equipment, and strategic cooperation without attaching the same political conditional frameworks that often accompany Western partnerships. No lectures about governance reforms tied to security packages. No aid pipelines are structured around ideological compliance. Just transactional defense cooperation. But here is the critical insight. Security is rarely the end goal. Security is the foundation that allows everything else to be renegotiated. A state under constant internal threat does not renegotiate mining contracts confidently. It does not restructure economic dependencies. It does not push back diplomatically against larger powers. It survives. Burkina Faso wants to move beyond survival. If Russian cooperation strengthens its armed forces operationally, improves logistics, intelligence gathering, and equipment modernization, then the government gains breathing room. Breathing room creates strategic space. Strategic space allows recalibration across sectors. That is where power enters the equation. Power is not just military capacity, it is a negotiation posture. It is the confidence to say no to unfavorable contracts. It is the ability to diversify trade partners. It is the psychological shift from dependency to calculation. Security partnerships influence that posture directly. But here is the risk. History shows that replacing one external security patron with another can quietly reproduce dependency under a new flag. Military hardware requires maintenance. Training pipelines create doctrinal influence. Intelligence cooperation creates information asymmetry. So the deeper question is not whether Russia can provide security assistance. The question is whether Burkina Faso can accept assistance without surrendering autonomy.
We need everyone's partnership, but we don't need the kind of paternalism. Sometimes those of us in Africa, for one reason or another, because of the history of colonialism and so forth, feel like, no, we don't need any. No, we need everybody. We need everyone's partnership, but we don't need the kind of paternalism that says we're the only ones that know, and do you know not? No, we need the partnership.
Amen.
That requires institutional strength, transparent contracts, diversified procurement channels, and domestic officer training capacity. Without those safeguards, security cooperation becomes structural reliance. With them, it becomes leverage. And leverage changes how a country negotiates everything else, from gold exports to diplomatic voting behavior. So when we ask whether this agreement is about security or power, the honest answer is both. Security is the mechanism. Power is the objective. But the moment security becomes a permanent dependency instead of transitional strengthening, the objective collapses. So here's the tension hanging in the air. Will this partnership create a stronger Burkina Faso, or simply a differently aligned one? let's strip the romance out of it. No major power deepens relations with a smaller state out of sentiment. Foreign policy is arithmetic, not emotion. So if Russia signs a foundational agreement with Burkina Faso, it is because something in that relationship serves Moscow's strategic calculus. Start with the global context. Since the war in Ukraine escalated in 2022, Russia has faced an unprecedented sanctions regime from the United States, the European Union, and its allies. Sanctions don't just freeze assets. They isolate financial systems, complicate trade flows, and restrict technological access. In response, Moscow has accelerated outreach to countries outside the Western Bloc, particularly across Africa, Asia, and the Middle East. Africa matters in this strategy for several reasons. First, diplomatic insulation. Every vote at the United Nations counts. Every abstention matters. When resolutions are tabled condemning Russia, neutrality from African states weakens the moral unity of Western pressure. Burkina Faso's position, even if not openly pro-Russia, contributes to the broader diplomatic balance. Second, geopolitical signaling. When Russia strengthens ties in West Africa, it sends a message to Europe. Influence in the Sahel was long dominated by France. By establishing structured cooperation with Burkina Faso, Moscow demonstrates that influence is contestable. Contestable influence forces competitors to rethink assumptions. Third, resource dynamics. Burkina Faso is one of Africa's major gold producers. Gold plays a quiet but powerful role in global finance. In a world where dollar transactions can be sanctioned, gold becomes a strategic hedge. Partnerships with gold-producing countries create alternative financial pathways. This does not mean exploitation is inevitable, but it does mean strategic interest is undeniable. Fourth, security footprint. Russia has expanded defense cooperation across parts of Africa in recent years. Training programs, equipment sales, and military advisory roles are tools of influence. They create long-term relationships within defense institutions, relationships that often outlast political cycles. But here's where nuance matters. Russia's capacity is not infinite. It is engaged militarily in Ukraine. Its economy is adapting under sanctions. It cannot afford purely symbolic alliances. That means any deepened relationship must generate tangible benefit, and that creates an opportunity for Burkina Faso. When a major power needs partners, it negotiates differently. It offers terms it might not offer in times of dominance. It seeks goodwill and strategic depth simultaneously. The February agreement institutionalizes this relationship. It moves cooperation from ad hoc engagement to a structured framework. That framework likely includes mechanisms for defense coordination, trade discussions, educational exchange, and diplomatic consultation. But here's the crucial question. Is Moscow approaching Burkina Faso as a long-term equal partner, or as a tactical node in a broader anti-Western strategy? Because if the relationship is tactical, it will fluctuate with global events. If it is strategic, it will invest in Burkina Faso's internal capacity, not just extract symbolic alignment. And that leads directly to the next layer. What exactly is Burkina Faso trying to build with this leverage? Let's pause for a second to say, big thank you to the Black Culture Diary community, where Black voices, stories, and legacies are preserved and amplified. By becoming a member, you're not just supporting the channel, you're becoming part of a powerful cultural movement. Let's continue. Security partnerships make headlines, but nations are not built by headlines. They are built by structures. So if Burkina Faso is expanding relations with Russia, the real question is not what Moscow gains. We explored that. The deeper question is what Ouagadougou is constructing beneath the surface. Look closely at the broader trajectory of Burkina Faso over the past 2 years. The language coming from leadership is not just about counterinsurgency. It is about sovereignty. It is about economic transformation. It is about reducing external dependency patterns that have shaped West African states for generations. That shift matters. For decades, much of Africa's economic model followed a predictable corridor. Extract raw materials, export them, import finished goods. Gold leaves, value leaves. Processing happens elsewhere. Currency stability is tied externally. Aid cycles shape fiscal planning. That architecture benefits external economies more than domestic industrialization. If Burkina Faso wants to break that cycle, It needs three things: security stabilization, institutional control over resources, alternative financial and diplomatic channels. The February agreement touches all three indirectly. If security improves, the state regains territorial confidence. If diplomatic options widen, Burkina Faso can negotiate mining contracts from a position of choice rather than necessity. If alternative financial pathways exist, sanctions or pressure lose some potency. This is not ideological rebellion. It is a structural redesign. But redesign requires discipline. Diversifying partnerships is only useful if it leads to domestic capacity building. That means training local engineers, strengthening revenue collection, developing, refining, and processing facilities, expanding agricultural productivity, building military institutions that are professional and nationally rooted, not externally dependent. If Russia provides technical cooperation that supports domestic skill transfer, it accelerates transformation. If it remains limited to arms transfers without institutional development, the impact will be shallow. And here is where generational psychology becomes critical. Young Africans are not impressed by symbolism anymore. They measure success in tangible outcomes: electricity reliability, employment opportunities, educational access, and technological infrastructure. They want sovereignty to feel material, not rhetorical. So the agreement becomes meaningful only if it integrates into a broader national strategy, one that connects security to economic autonomy and economic autonomy to institutional resilience. This is not about choosing East over West. It is about multiplying options until no single external actor can dictate terms. But here lies the strategic test. Can Burkina Faso convert expanded diplomatic space into an irreversible domestic transformation, or will it remain vulnerable to the gravitational pull of external powers? Because repositioning globally is easier than rebuilding internally, and that is the hinge on which everything now turns. Here's a reminder to please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Black culture, history, civilization, and identity. Let's continue now. Now we reach the uncomfortable layer. It is easy to celebrate diversification. It feels bold, it feels sovereign, it feels like movement after stagnation. But geopolitics punishes naivety. A multipolar strategy is powerful only if it is managed with precision. The world today is not simply divided into the West versus Russia. It is fragmented into overlapping rivalries: US-China, Russia-NATO, regional power contests, energy competition, and supply chain wars. When a smaller state inserts itself into this environment, it must understand that every partnership triggers reactions elsewhere. Burkina Faso is not operating in isolation. Its decisions are observed in Paris, Washington, Brussels, Moscow, Beijing, and within ECOWAS capitals. Alignment, even partial, reshapes perception. Perception influences trade terms, financial access, diplomatic tone, and security calculations. Here is the strategic tension. Multipolarity gives options, but options create pressure from all sides. If Burkina Faso deepens ties with Russia, Western financial institutions may recalibrate their engagement. Development assistance flows may adjust. Security intelligence sharing from previous partners may narrow. Regional diplomatic friction could increase. So why take the risk? Because remaining inside a single alignment carries its own risk: stagnation. For years, dependency patterns limited policy flexibility. External approval often preceded internal decision-making. Multipolarity disrupts that dynamic. It creates negotiation space. But negotiation space must be defended. A successful multipolar strategy requires internal coherence. Ministries must coordinate. Contracts must be transparent. Security institutions must remain nationally controlled. Otherwise, foreign influence seeps into structural arteries of the state. History provides cautionary tales. States that shifted alignments abruptly without strengthening institutions often found themselves caught between competing powers, vulnerable to economic retaliation or political destabilization. Strategic balance requires steady hands. Burkina Faso's leadership must therefore manage perception carefully. This agreement cannot look like ideological allegiance. It must look like sovereign diversification. The distinction matters, because the goal is not to replace one dependency with another. The goal is leverage. Leverage means being able to say yes to one partner without losing the ability to say no. It means extracting benefits from multiple corridors without being captured by any single one. Young Africans understand this intuitively. They do not want symbolic defiance that isolates their economies. They want calculated autonomy, bold but intelligent. So the February agreement becomes a test case. If it strengthens Burkina Faso's bargaining position across sectors, it will be remembered as strategic foresight. If it narrows diplomatic flexibility and deepens reliance, it becomes a gamble that backfires. And this leads to the final question that sits quietly beneath everything. Is Burkina Faso simply repositioning in a changing world? Or is it attempting to redefine how African states engage global power entirely? All of this, the meeting, the agreement, the recalibration, leads to one final, unavoidable question. Is this just Burkina Faso adjusting to pressure? Or is this the signal that Africa is no longer reacting to the global order, but actively reshaping how it engages it? For decades, African foreign policy often operated inside boundaries drawn elsewhere. Security partnerships were framed as necessities. Economic models were inherited. Financial systems were externally anchored. When crises emerged, solutions were imported. When decisions were made, they were explained to Africa, not negotiated with it. That pattern created a quiet psychological hierarchy. But something has shifted. Across the continent, you see it. Countries renegotiating mining contracts, demanding local processing, reconsidering currency arrangements, questioning security doctrines, exploring BRICS ties, expanding South-South cooperation, testing diplomatic alternatives. Burkina Faso's agreement with Russia fits into that pattern, not as rebellion, but as repositioning. The difference is subtle, but profound. Reacting means responding to pressure. Deciding means shaping the pressure itself. When a state expands its alliances voluntarily before being cornered, it alters the negotiating table. It sends a signal. We have options. Options change tone, and tone changes outcomes. But here is where maturity becomes essential. True decision-making power is not measured by who you align with. It is measured by what you build at home. If Burkina Faso uses this diplomatic space to strengthen institutions, professionalize its military, expand industrial capacity, educate its youth, and secure revenue transparency, then this moment becomes structural. If it remains symbolic, if it substitutes external dependency rather than dismantling it, then the shift will be cosmetic. Africa's next phase will not be defined by whether it partners with Russia, China, Europe, or the United States. It will be defined by whether partnerships become tools, not anchors. Young Africans are watching closely. They do not want emotional alignment. They want strategic intelligence. They want sovereignty that translates into infrastructure, employment, and security in their neighborhoods. This February signature matters because it reflects a willingness to experiment with geopolitical balance. But the real revolution will not be in Moscow or in diplomatic communiques. It will be in whether Burkina Faso and others like it can convert a multipolar opportunity into irreversible domestic strength. So here we stand, a quiet document, a careful handshake, a recalibration in motion, and one final question that lingers heavier than all the rest. Is this the beginning of Africa finally negotiating the world on its own terms, not as a battleground of powers, but as a power in its own right? Let us know in the comment section. Will Russia be the partner Africa deserves? Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If so, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We have decided to bring videos on something nobody talks about: the Black culture, civilization, history, and evidence about how glorious Blacks have been. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.